Andy's experiences were always hazy. According to the medical narrative, he had a very poor heart, but he had led a lifestyle that, well, few of us in the family were even aware of. It's been a really difficult decade, ever since I guess I lost Mo. The Gibb family has been the subject of rumors for many years. Unspoken secrets, grief, and rumors of genius. Barry Gibb has finally spoken up at the age of 78, revealing details he had previously kept hidden from the public. But why would one of the most enduring figures in music feel the need to finally share? What does it tell us about the brotherly tie that tragedy, success, and fame could never break? This is not only a musical tale. This tale of love, remorse, and legacy endures to this day. Barry's lengthy confession was suppressed. Barry Gibb surrounded his grief with walls throughout the majority of his career. He was the final surviving Gibb brother, whose job it was to carry on the family's musical legacy. The frontman with the soaring falsetto, the songwriter behind some of the greatest pop successes ever, and the Bee Gees' stable anchor in the eyes of the public. However, behind the limelight, Barry carried a tale that was largely unsaid for many years. The tragic, complex reality of his younger brother, Andy. Even devoted followers were taken aback when Barry, at the age of 78, suddenly gave in to the pressure of time and spoke with candor. Andy Gibb was more than just the family's baby. He was Barry's shadow, the one he naturally wished to shield, care for, and lead. Barry saw genius when Andy first picked up a microphone, not just potential. He frequently said that Andy's pop voice was the purest of all. The harmonies that had made the Bee Gees famous may be matched or even surpassed by this voice. But Barry noticed something else too. Andy's vulnerability, which made him both alluring on stage and dangerously open off it, was something far more delicate. Now, Barry talks about Andy with a mixture of dazzling pride and indescribable grief. He remembers the excitement of producing Andy's first songs, supporting him as a mentor and fan, and putting all of his own creative energy into helping to mold Andy's career. Shadow dancing and the song, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, weren't only Andy's successes. Barry gave them to his younger brother as presents. The world witnessed a golden lad with chart-topping tunes and movie star appearances. Barry, however, saw a young man who was still too young to deal with the debilitating demands of celebrity, still in search of identity, and yet in dire need of acceptance. This is Barry's most profound admission. He carefully presented his brother's legacy as one of talent, light, and charm, while avoiding direct questions about Andy's hardships for years. But at the age of 78, Barry finally opened out about what he had been keeping to himself. He frequently questions whether he let Andy down. In infrequent interviews, Barry talked about restless nights and unanswered questions. Could Andy have been saved from self-destruction by harsher love? Would he have been spared if he had taken a different approach or stepped back? He characterized it as an unrelenting pain, an older brother who is constantly wondering if he'd done enough, rather than guilt in the conventional sense. The frankness in Barry's voice is what gives his words such a powerful impact. He speaks with a sorrow that time has only deepened, not with resentment or condemnation. Andy lost more than simply a sibling when he passed away at the age of 30. What Barry still thinks could have been spectacular was the loss of a future. He acknowledged that the absence of his younger brother still casts a shadow over all of his subsequent accomplishments. No Hall of Fame recognition, no Grammy, and no sold-out performance could ever fill the void left by Andy's absence. Barry's disclosure of the final days they spent together was arguably the most moving. He also disclosed that he had a disagreement with Andy, shortly before his 30th birthday, about a small issue of indifference that didn't seem to be very important at the time. As it happened, Barry had no idea that those would be the final words they exchanged in person. Andy vanished a few days later. Barry has carried this unresolved tension for decades, and it reminds him that even loving families do not always have the opportunity to reunite. For Barry, speaking the truth at 78 meant humanizing Andy's tale rather than changing it. For him, Andy was neither a tragedy for tabloid newspapers nor a lesson in life. He was his younger brother. Funny, compassionate, smart, but horribly vulnerable. His admission exposed the heartbreaking balance between love and powerlessness, the human cost of celebrity, and the wounds left behind when a family loses one of its biggest stars. The world still remembers Andy for his amazing theatrical presence, even as Barry admits his personal grief. A masterpiece best encapsulated in one remarkable performance. Andy gave Reagan a command performance. Andy Gibb entered one of the most prominent stages of his career in 1981. The event was a command performance, a variety show that was broadcast on television and took place at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., paying tribute to the First Lady and President Ronald Reagan. Music royalty, including Andy Williams, June Carter Cash, Johnny Cash, and even Luciano Pavarotti, were present during the evening. The crowd would be left stunned, however, by the youngest of the Gibb brothers. In addition to grabbing the attention of a president, Andy Gibb's performance at the age of 23 reminded everyone that his talent was worthy of standing side by side with his well-known siblings. Actress Victoria Principal, Andy's then-girlfriend, introduced him to the public, and he entered it with a composed assurance that defied his age. He picked out a daring tune, words that his brothers Barry, Robin, and Maurice wrote and made famous. The Bee Gees had already solidified the song as one of their most recognizable ballads. It was bold and highly symbolic for Andy to claim it as his own in front of such a distinguished crowd. Being referred to as simply the Baby Gibb did not satisfy him. He aimed to demonstrate to the world the strength of his artistic abilities on their own. The room grew quiet as he sang. Both guests and viewers were astounded by Andy's voice, which had the same warmth, vibrato, and falsetto that Barry had made famous. The similarities were inevitable in that moment. Andy wasn't simply physically like his older brother. He mirrored Barry's voice, achieving the same vocal purity and emotional peaks. Later, some fans would claim that Andy's voice had a new twist that made it distinctively his own, but that it was still like Barry's essence was present. It was more than just a technical show. Yes, that was a revelation. Andy sang the song with conviction and clarity. Many people externalized the song right away, and it reflected all that was true for Andy. As she presented him, a pleased Victoria Principal smiled into the camera. The standing ovation, however, was what ultimately confirmed what Barry and his brothers had always believed. Andy Gibb would become famous, and then, maybe because he could now at last claim the phases of passage, Andy had his moment of triumph when he sang a song he wrote himself, Me Without You, in front of an audience for the first time. Andy was placed alongside Barry, Robin, and Maurice, based on evidence that Riley had at home. Not in terms of hiding in the Bee Gees' shadows, but rather in terms of emerging into the light as himself. Fans will relive this moment from the video for decades to come, typically with a hint of emotion. Is always mentioned, since many people think Andy looked a lot like him, both in appearance and in the way he was able to mimic the falsetto and vocal skills that were so rich with the association of the Bee Gees' sound. While some have claimed that Andy's performance gave them shivers, others have praised him for striking a lovely balance between the song's timeless, mature tone and his youthful vitality. It continues to be one of the most cited performances to date, demonstrating Andy's genuine talent. When Barry reflected on that performance years later, it proved to be something that brought with it both sweetness and bitterness. Because, while it served as confirmation that his younger brother was more than just a pop star with fleeting hits, it also served as a reminder of what the world ultimately lost. Barry's sadness that Andy's life and career would end before they could fulfill their full potential was only heightened by witnessing him deliver words with such command. However, Andy Starr's personal struggles were already starting to show as he climbed to prominence behind the scenes on international stages. The brittle side of celebrity. Andy Gibb appeared to have it all from the outside. Audiences were mesmerized by his youthful appearance and charisma as soon as he took the stage. His energy seemed limitless, his smile appeared natural, and his voice had a tenderness that gave the impression that he was singing just for them. Andy represented youth and stardom to millions of admirers, a golden boy from one of the most well-known families in music. Barry and the rest of the Gibb family, however, saw something else behind that meticulously manicured facade. Most outsiders never suspected this frailty. Even as a youngster, Andy had always been sensitive. Andy grew up witnessing his older brother's achievements, as they were hardened by the hardships of trying to succeed as a group in the 1960s and early 1970s. The Gibb name was already associated with global fame by the time he started his own career. For other musicians, it might have taken years to gain access to the opportunities that Andy's reputation provided. However, it also put him under a lot of pressure. On the charts, he was up against more than simply other vocalists. He was evaluating himself against world-conquering legends, Barry, Robin, and Maurice. Andy's talent wasn't the issue. Andy had the purest pop voice of all the Gibb brothers, according to Barry himself. The pace was the issue. In just 1 week, Andy went from being a young man with big dreams to a worldwide superstar with #1 hits, sold-out gigs, and adoring followers. Andy had barely established himself at the age of 19, so this kind of unexpected success could be described as both seductive and dangerous. The greatest loneliness was brought on by fame. Despite being surrounded by admirers all the time, the young man didn't get much of what he truly wanted from those interactions. His desire for grounding, which fame could never provide, grew as his success increased. Barry claims that Andy's need for approval frequently led him into unsavory relationships, as well as alluring circumstances in the entertainment industry. Andy's vulnerabilities, which he was too proud to display in front of passengers, were concealed by laughter, zygotic, and unending late nights. Later on, he would decide for himself how helpless those years had been. The oldest brother believed that he was Andy's mentor and guardian, offering him all the love and advice. On other occasions, though, Andy retreated even further. Barry often said that he thought Andy was chasing an uncatchable, elusive object. For instance, peace that no amount of celebrity could ever bring, freedom from his own doubts, and unwavering acceptance. Seeing his sibling descend into destructive cycles was excruciating. Additionally, Barry frequently struggled with the question of whether he could have done more. Andy never lost his capacity to light up a stage, though, despite everything. In actuality, despite his difficulties, Andy continued to get claims from the audience during his appearances. His charm was genuine. Even if it was just momentary, it truly was. Fans witnessed the star's self-assured smile, but his family was aware of the internal conflict. It was terrible for Barry, who had watched helplessly, to see his youngest brother bear such a heavy burden under such a brilliant facade in the years that followed. Nevertheless, Andy's genius would occasionally shine through the shadows, and his solo career would demonstrate exactly how brilliant he was. A voice that was similar to Barry's. Fans frequently gave a double take when Andy Gibb opened his mouth to sing. It was more than just a physical likeness to Barry. His voice was alive with it. The warmth that appeared to envelop a line like velvet, the falsetto, the vibrato. Everything was there. To Bee Gees fans, Andy sounded like the leader of the band, but with a youthful exuberance that set him unique. Critics saw straight away that Andy had some of Barry's vocal strength, but he added his own special brilliance, which put him on a different path to fame than his siblings. Andy exploded into the music industry in the late 1970s, with a series of singles that thrust him into the public eye. Barry wrote and produced his first record, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, which peaked at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1977. For a teenager just starting out in the business, it was a remarkable accomplishment that let everyone know Andy wasn't following in the footsteps of the Bee Gees. He was a powerful individual in his own way. Love is Thicker Than Water and Shadow Dancing followed the song's success. The latter turned out to be one of the disco era's key songs. Andy was at his best in Shadow Dancing in particular. The song, which he co-wrote with his brothers, became an international hit, demonstrating that Andy possessed the same creative spark that passed through the Gibb family and could perform musical magic. Millions of copies of his albums were sold. His visage was featured on magazine covers all around the world, and his concerts sold out. By the age of 20, Andy had achieved chart supremacy and heartthrob status, a degree of recognition that many musicians strive for throughout their lives. There was pride and amazement, Barry recalled. He openly acknowledged that Andy had the most innocent pop voice of all the Gibb brothers. He had a remarkable ability to switch between an angelic falsetto and a powerful chest voice with ease, bringing emotion to a song or dazzle an audience with a simple smile. Whereas Barry was able to sing, Andy had the emotional freedom to sing in his own style, and there was subtlety in his tone that was instantly recognizable. Barry would characterize Andy as the brother with the most natural star quality, where his voice and essence seemed almost automatic. Working with Andy was very personal to Barry, who saw producing songs for a younger brother as more than just music. It was also about protecting, guiding, and helping Andy find his place in a world that could be both brilliant and cruel. Barry made an investment in Andy's career, writing and producing songs that emphasized his strengths while pushing him to grow as a performer. Younger people likely never connected with the Bee Gees' disco milieu, but they were captivated by Andy's boyish charm and romantic ballads. The studio atmosphere reflected their bond as brothers, with moments of encouragement interspersed with heavy unspoken responsibility. Fans seemed to enjoy this whole logic, and Andy seemed to be raised as the youthful extension of Bee Gees' legacy solo star, imbibing the same magic but blossoming under his own light. The new #1 hits brought with them new demands and pressures, and for a boy barely 20 years old, the world was already expecting him to perform at the same level of perfection. that took decades of his older brothers' lives to achieve. The pace of recording, touring, and public appearances was so fast that Andy rarely had time to catch his breath. He connected the generations, not just the youngest Gibb. Behind the smiling magazine covers and radio anthems lay a young man still trying to discover his identity outside of the spotlight. Barry would later admit that although Andy's success was a source of immense pride, it also carried a sneaky risk. The more his star rose, the more unstable his foundation would become. Although his voice sounded like Barry's, his struggles sounded like something far darker. Andy's fame soared along with the weight he carried behind the scenes, and the fast-paced nature of his success left little time for rest. Yet, as the hits piled up, so did the pressures, pushing Andy toward a battle he could not win alone: addiction, depression, and despair. The cracks appeared. Despite being loved by millions, Andy was struggling with an enemy that no #1 song could defeat: addiction. Cain became both his escape and his downfall, a destructive habit that drew him further into a vicious cycle of instability, despair, and self-doubt. Barry and the family watched helplessly as Andy attempted to fight his way out. Determined to recover his health and his future, he repeatedly checked himself into recovery programs, each time with the hope that perhaps this time he would be able to break free from the hold of illegal substances. But each time his demon's pull overcame his willpower. For those closest to him, the contrast was devastating. Offstage, the weight of depression took its toll, but onstage, Andy still had the ability to dazzle, flashing that boyish smile and delivering songs with the same tenderness fans adored. The spotlight that once made Andy shine now seemed to expose his fragility, and the industry that celebrated him in public often abandoned him in private. The young star who had once seemed invincible was now a man struggling to hold himself together. By the end of 1988, Andy had started to decline so quickly that even his family was shocked. In candid moments, he revealed the loneliness and fear that haunted him, emotions heightened by the constant scrutiny of fame. Robin Gibb remembered how rapidly his younger brother appeared to fall apart that year, and he embodied Andy's mindset as one that was utterly disturbed, with despair consuming all the hope it had once held, and the brightness that had once vaguely identified Andy's character gradually giving way to unavoidable exhaustion. Considering this at 78, Barry remarked that such final months would always be remembered as scars. He had talked about feeling powerless as he watched Andy's physical and mental health deteriorate on a regular basis, knowing that no matter how much the family tried to show him their love, it would never be enough to protect him from what he had to go through on his own inside. In moments of brutal honesty, Barry admitted to wondering if tougher love might have saved Andy, or if harsher interventions, stricter boundaries, or a different kind of guidance might have broken the cycle or only made Andy more distant. These questions became the ghosts that haunted Barry long after Andy's death. And behind his grief, there was a question that never left his mind: could he have done more? Fans who loved Andy often remember him as the smiling performer who lit up stages. But for Barry, the truth was more nuanced. Andy was a soul at war with himself. He acknowledged that his guilt was not about failing as a brother, but rather about never knowing if the decisions he made were the right ones. This uncertainty haunted him as much as the loss itself. The tragedy of addiction and depression is that what they take is less important than what they steal from the world. Barry eventually revealed this duality of Andy's public shining life, but deep private despair, when he expressed all these matters at the age of 78. Andy was a person who could put beauty into his songs while feeling hollow inside. A person's music, growth, and joy. Decades of sound have passed without even having the chance to develop. But before tragedy struck, there was a flicker of hope in this telling by Barry. A plan that, if it could be carried out, could rewrite Andy's story. By 1988, Andy Gibb was at a turning point that could have changed everything. Although his 20s had been characterized by struggles with addiction and depression, there were indications that Andy was ready to turn the corner, and his family, especially Barry, had cause for optimism. One last plan that could have changed Andy's story. The fourth BG that never was. After years of pursuing his own career as a solo artist, Andy would finally fully enter the family fold, solidifying the very tradition that had raised him since he was a young boy. That year, the Bee Gees made a historic announcement. Andy would formally join his brothers as the fourth BG. It felt both symbolic and redemptive. Fans dreamed of the harmony that four Gibb voices, each unique but bound together by blood, could create, and the idea of Andy joining Barry, Robin, and Morris on stage was more than just an exciting prospect. The timing seemed ideal. The Bee Gees were already legends, but Andy's arrival promised a new chapter. It seemed inevitable, like the youngest brother was finally coming home. For Barry, having Andy by his side meant more than just music. It meant family, about providing his younger brother with a place where he could be protected, encouraged, and appreciated for his talents, rather than being alone because of his difficulties. Additionally, Andy had signed a record deal with Island Records at the same time, which was a clear sign that her career was still going strong. He was working on new material and practicing for a comeback that would show audiences that he was more than just a former teen idol, but also a mature, experienced artist. For the first time in aeons, the future appeared incredibly bright. And Barry would look back on these days with a bittersweet tone, remembering the excitement that had surrounded Andy's new beginnings, including hearing his brother's voice again. The plans were ambitious, relaunching the solo career as it was, and finally taking on the fourth BG role. That same voice that had once topped the charts and won thousands of hearts. Barry had always been concerned about Andy's talent, or more specifically, whether he would be able to find the stability to match that talent. In 1988, for the first time, it seemed like everything was coming together. But unfortunately, despite all the good arguments, Andy was still vulnerable. Robin Gibb would later admit that by the early part of 1988, Andy saw a great deal of deterioration in a very short time, describing a real darkness for Andy, the kind that saw his depression actually worsening as plans for a comeback grew. The toll that years of substance abuse and trauma had taken on his health was not simply going to go away. Barry was thrilled to finally be officially welcoming Andy into the Bees, a dream he had cherished for years, but he was also in excruciating pain as he watched this unfold. It was a very alien sort of situation, where Andy was fighting two wars, one against his body and mind, and another for regaining his place in music. The final chapter of Andy Gibb's story came far too soon. In March 1988, a few days after his 30th birthday, Andy was admitted to a hospital in Oxford, complaining of chest pains. The collapse was abrupt, shocking, and devastating, not just for Barry, but for the entire world. Loss, legacy, and lasting truth. Barry was devastated to learn that Andy Gibb, the youngest of the Gibb brothers, had passed away from heart failure on March 10th, leaving behind a career cut short and a family forever altered. His body, weakened by years of substance abuse and emotional turmoil, could no longer withstand the strain. The announcement of Andy's death was not just the loss of a brother, it was the loss of a lifetime of possibilities. A cruel ending to a story that had once seemed destined for greatness. He had watched Andy struggle for years, doing everything he knew to help him regain control, protect him, and guide him. The unfinished nature of Andy's journey added to the grief. Barry was left with silence, where there should have been music, despite the fact that there were still albums to be made, concerts to be sung, and memories to be shared. To make matters worse, Barry revealed with devastating candor that he and Andy had argued just before Andy's 30th birthday. This regret has been with Barry for decades. That lingering conflict, unresolved at the time of Andy's death, became a wound that Barry admitted still weighs on him every single day. "I carry that with me," he confessed years later. At the time, it seemed like a minor disagreement, the kind of sibling clash that would blow over in days. Barry never imagined those would be the last words he exchanged with his baby brother. "And I always will." Nevertheless, even in the midst of his sorrow, Barry refused to let Andy's story end in tragedy alone. Instead, he made the decision to preserve his brother's memory through music, the one language they had always had the deepest connection with. Whether Barry is performing his own songs or Bee Gees' classics, Andy's presence is always felt when he takes the stage. Barry has stated in interviews that he feels Andy's spirit beside him, and that every note he sings will be a small way to keep his youngest brother close by. For Barry, Andy is not a person from the past, but rather someone who lives his life, singing for his family and wearing the melodies and harmonies that define them. This may also help to keep Andy's light alive for fans. Barry's most recent revelations are so profound, not only because of the sadness they convey, but also because of the honesty they radiate. Even years after his death, audiences still relive his concert performances, such as his rendition of Words or one of his #1 hits, simply to marvel at that raw talent that was extinguished too soon. His reflections will not be about repeating Andy's story, but will honor it. The triumphs, the setbacks, the loss. At 78, he no longer tries to protect himself or the fans from the pain caused by what happened. but instead he opens what's left of his heart to reveal the many levels that love, regret, and family run through death itself. Although Andy's life may have ended too soon, his light lives on through Barry's words and every note he sings on stage. Barry Gibb's honesty at 78 is more than just a confession. It serves as a reminder that beneath the music and the fame are human stories of love, loss, and family. The revelation of the truth now gives fans a closer bond with the brothers we previously believed we already knew. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if this story touched you. Watch the next video on your screen for more unseen tales of the greatest legends in music.